lenders to your company lost over $1 billion and more than 1,100 people were laid off.
Well,
is that the way that you run the country?
Let me tell you about the lenders. First of all, these lenders aren't babies. These are total killers. These are not the nice, sweet little people that you think, okay? You know, I mean, you're living in a world of the make-believe, Chris. You want to know the truth.
Donald Trump taking exception to my question about his history of bankruptcies at the big Fox News debate. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Syndicated columnist George Will, Lisa Lerer, national politics reporter for the Associated Press, radio talk show host Laura Ingraham, and Charles Lane from the Washington Post. Laura, what do you make of Trump's comments during the debate and since?
Well, I think a lot of this is a sideshow, frankly. I think that, the insults, the late-night tweets, the disinviting him to conventions. Here's where we're going to be if Trump's in the race or if he's out of the race. I have no idea what's going to happen with Donald Trump. There is about 20%, maybe as many as 30% of GOP voters in the country today who are absolutely livid at the GOP. Okay, and these people are so mad and they're so frustrated that they're willing to throw in with someone who has no political experience, who's obviously can be very crude and sometimes very rude, and they're so mad that they're willing to go with him because he's saying things about whether it's mass migration or illegal immigration, bad trade deals, that pretty much no one else is saying. So I think the focus should be, how is the GOP, if it's a Scott Walker, if it's a Jeb Bush, whoever the nominee is going to be, how is the GOP going to win without that 10, 20, or 30% of that vote, whatever it is? They need those people to go back to the GOP if Trump goes away. So that's been my focus consistently. And all of this intrigue and the insults, and I think that is just, that's going to go away. And then the GOP is going to have to put itself back together again like Humpty Dumpty.
Well, I want to pick up on that, and it leads me perfectly to you, Chuck, because the lead story in your paper, The Washington Post, today was basically, well, the GOP thinks maybe Trump's balloon is beginning to lose steam and that they're going to be able to pivot to more conventional politicians. But it sort of begs the question, how can they control this? And isn't it really up to the voters as to whether they're going to stay with Trump or move away and try and find another Republican? At this point, they don't like those other Republicans as much.
Yes, and there's no real test of the voters for a while. It's all just measured by polls, and so he might live or die by the polls. I think what this shows is that Laura's absolutely right. There is this volatile element within the party that the party kind of doesn't know how to handle, and the element doesn't know how to handle the party. But I think that he may have gone a little bit too far with his comments about Megyn Kelly, and you saw for the first time people who, I mean, Eric Erickson is not some sort of
we should say he's the head of the blog, the organization Red State.
Is not a hypersensitive, politically correct liberal who banned Donald Trump from his conference because of that. That brought a lot of other comments out from leading Republicans. There's almost now a divide within the party between those who are overtly condemning him and those who are not. You saw that Huckabee and Cruz have held back. And the problem for the establishment of the party is there is no limiting factor on how long Donald Trump can stay in this race, except for what Donald Trump feels like doing.
George, your thoughts about Donald Trump, the debate, and the shape of the Republican race in the wake of the debate?
I'd begin by disputing the premise of both Chuck and Laura, which is that these are Republican voters. These are not Tea Party voters who are very substantive. I think the people attracted to Donald Trump are marginally connected to politics at all and are brought into this for the entertainment value. I like to think that the beginning and the end was with a question you asked him in the debate when you said, what is your evidence for your statements about the complicity of the Mexican government? Donald Trump doesn't do evidence. He says apoplexy is a substitute for argument, so he just went off on another rant. Time will come when politics becomes blocking and tackling. You go to Iowa, you have to organize, you have to sit in a lot of living rooms with a macaroon in one hand and a cup of hot chocolate in the other. Now picture Donald Trump doing that. I can't. So I think he will seek his own level.
But I just want to, before we move on to Lisa, let's say it's 20 or 30%. You say they're not Republicans, they're not conservatives. They're people, they're voters. And, you know, if they either sit out, and I think generally speaking, you'd say they have voted for the Republican, certainly against the Democrat, or if Donald Trump, and he certainly has left it open, ran as a third-party candidacy, wouldn't that be enough to sink the Republican nominee either way?
These are voters that the Republicans want. The Republicans should want all voters, and particularly these voters. But to say that he's tapped into something, Henry Wallace tapped into something in the far left of American politics in the late 40s. The John Birch Society tapped into something. George Wallace tapped into something. And it was up to the grown-ups in the labor movement in the 1940s and the grown-ups in the conservative movement in the 1960s to read those elements, the Riot Act, and say, come back in, but come back in on our terms because we're not going down the road you want to go.
Lisa, let me bring you in. You are covering the Clinton campaign for AP. In the debate, several candidates toughened their stance on abortion and any limits on some of the exceptions that are allowed now for legal abortion. There were moves to the right on same-sex marriage and immigration. As they watched the debate, and I think there was a general sort of move to the right in this, maybe with the exception of Jeb Bush and a couple of others, were they licking their chops in the Clinton headquarters?
Well, I actually was reporting from Clinton headquarters during the debate, and I can tell you the mood was pretty upbeat over there. You know, there's a misalignment of incentives here between the two parties, right? Republicans are looking at this through the lens of the primary, which of course they have to do, and they have to take certain positions to win over the Republican base. But the Clinton team has the luxury of looking through this through the general election. So they were pretty gleeful about some of the positions Republicans took on issues like abortion, exceptions to abortion, the case of rape, incest, life of the mother, on gay marriage, on immigration. Their plan is to basically resurrect the Obama coalition of young women and minority voters that boosted him to the White House twice. Those issues play particularly well with that group, so they see a lot to work with here. Now, that's not to say there weren't a few shadows and all this sunshine and rainbows, right, that they were seeing. Rubio, I think they're going to be paying a little bit closer attention to him. He could present a pretty strong generational argument against Hillary Clinton, and Kasich also caught their attention. You know, I think it's an open question whether he could get through the primary process on the Republican side, but if he did, he could present this brand of compassion.
Now, the name you're not mentioning, which I think a lot of people thought might be potentially the strongest Republican candidate in a general election against Hillary Clinton, is Jeb Bush.
Right. Well, you know, they've been keeping a close eye on him. In the run-up to the debate, Clinton had really focused her attacks sharp attacks for a couple days on Jeb Bush. So he was already on their list. He remains on their list. You know, certainly he's the best funded in the Republican field, and you know they are worried about his pull with Latinos in the general.
Laura, we've got about a minute left. Yeah. With Trump pushing the envelope even further with Jeb Bush, I think it's fair to say, having a somewhat disappointing performance on Thursday night. Who is the front runner for the Republican nomination?
Well, we'll see the new polls that come out. But, you know, I've been saying this for 2 years, and I think George probably disagrees with me, but I think Jeb Bush probably won that debate. And people say, well, he was flat in his performance. I'll tell you why he won it. Because the focus was on Megyn and Trump, okay? And Jeb Bush sort of quietly, and George W. Bush is calling him the tortoise now because he's quietly amassing the donor base. He has now $120 million in the bank, and his network is locked down. Once that Bush negative advertising starts flowing against anyone who rears his or her head, whether it's Marco or Carly or John Kasich, we're going to see what was done to Gingrich in Florida. When Romney took out Gingrich in Florida in 2012, Bush is really good at talking about tone, but when push comes to shove, that negative advertising is going to blanket Florida, New Hampshire, and beyond. So I still look at Jeb Bush as the front runner. Trump may be still up in the polls. I don't know how long he'll stay in. He's the man to beat still in my mind.
30 seconds, George Will. Who's the front runner?
There is no front runner and won't be a Republican race to speak of until this coarse and vulgar man who is at the center of this argument is marginalized. When that happens, we're going to see who the strength is, but we're going to see also, Laura, the declining utility of the last political dollar. The last $40 million really don't matter that much.
We'll see. We'll see.
To be continued. All right, we have to take a break here.